Jessica had stood humiliated for nearly an hour when the hotel's glass doors slammed open like a thunderclap. A towering man in military stride stormed in, eyes burning with fury, and within seconds the arrogant manager was trembling on his knees. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jessica Morgan stepped into the Lakeshore Grand Hotel with the brittle, aching fatigue of someone who had been standing for far too many hours. Her sneakers, once white, were scuffed from sprinting between delayed flights. The lobby stretched out before her, an expanse of luxury. Polished marble floors, towering crystal chandeliers, oil paintings heavy in ornate gold frames. It was the kind of place that whispered money with every quiet echo of a suitcase wheel. Dragging her battered luggage behind her, Jessica made her way toward the reception desk. It gleamed under the bright lighting, almost too perfect, like a stage waiting for a performance she wasn't sure she was invited to join. 3 clerks stood behind it, 2 women and 1 young man in an immaculate navy blazer. They laughed at some private joke, oblivious to her presence. Jessica paused, shifting the weight of her bag, then stepped forward with an expectant, polite smile. Surely someone would notice. A glance, a nod, even a "be right with you." She waited, hope flickering. Nothing. 5 minutes passed. The edges of her patience began to fray, but she told herself, "They're busy. They'll see me in a second." She cleared her throat delicately, an audible signal. One of the clerks, the young man, flicked his eyes toward her, registered her standing there, and turned back to his conversation, laughing louder, as if punctuating his dismissal. Jessica's heart gave a small, miserable thud. She gripped the suitcase handle tighter, the textured plastic digging into her palm. A chill pricked her skin, despite the warm lighting. 10 minutes. She shifted from foot to foot, a bead of sweat sliding down her back beneath her worn gray jacket. She caught a reflection in a gold-trimmed mirror behind the desk. Hair flattened from the plane, makeup smudged from travel, sneakers obvious against the lobby's grandeur. She looked ordinary. 15 minutes. Finally she spoke, voice dry and small. "Excuse me." Todd, his name stitched neatly onto his blazer pocket, turned his head just enough to glance at her. His mouth curled into something between indifference and mild amusement. He said nothing. He simply turned away, as if she had been a passing draft of air. Jessica blinked. A hot flush of shame flooded her face. She wasn't crazy. She was being ignored. The minutes dragged like hours. New guests swept into the lobby, expensive luggage, tailored suits, confident smiles, and the clerks lit up, offering greetings and key cards without hesitation. Jessica remained planted at the counter, her suitcase by her side, an unwanted statue. By the time the clock hit 40 minutes, the sinking realization had hardened into something sharp and cold inside her. She wasn't invisible because they didn't see her. She was invisible because they had decided she wasn't worth seeing. Her cheeks burned as laughter and idle chatter danced around her. Jessica tightened her grip on the handle until her knuckles whitened, swallowing the lump in her throat. She had traveled 1,000 miles for a future she was fighting to build, only to be treated here like she didn't exist. And the worst part, the part that stuck like glass in her chest, was that no one even thought she might fight back. Not someone like her. Not someone they thought didn't matter. Not yet. The low hum of lobby conversation seemed to hush when Mr. Brennan appeared, as if the very walls recognized the man who ruled this glittering domain. Thin and sharply dressed, his tailored navy blazer looked stitched from arrogance itself. Jessica's spine straightened instinctively. A flicker of hope sparked in her chest. Finally, someone in charge. Someone who would see her, hear her, and right the wrong. She shifted her suitcase, smoothing down her jacket, and opened her mouth to call out. But Mr. Brennan didn't even glance in her direction. His polished shoes clicked against the marble as he strode by, focused entirely on a couple unloading designer shopping bags by the elevator. Jessica blinked, disoriented, her heart stuttering in the hollow space he left behind. Gathering her voice, she stepped forward, trying to mask the tremble tightening her throat. "Sir, I've been waiting almost an hour." He stopped, turned and looked at her, truly looked for the first time, with an expression carved out of disdain. His gaze flicked over her travel-worn clothes, the battered suitcase, the tired lines around her eyes, before his lip curled into a lazy sneer. And then, with deliberate cruelty, he raised his voice just enough so that nearby guests could hear. "Maybe next time, book a place you can actually afford." The words landed like a slap across Jessica's face. A sharp, immediate stillness blanketed the lobby. From the corner of her eye, Jessica saw heads turn. A couple on a velvet sofa paused their conversation. A businessman, lowering his newspaper, tilted it back up slowly, as if to shield himself from the unfolding scene. Someone chuckled under their breath, a sound more painful than outright laughter. Jessica's breath caught in her lungs. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. The weight of 100 invisible judgments pressed down on her shoulders. Her cheeks flamed, her chest tightened. Inside, something broke loose. Not sadness, not the aching humiliation she had first felt, but something deeper, darker. Hatred. Not petty anger. Not fleeting resentment. A molten, thrumming hatred born from being made to feel small, disposable, less than, not through accident, but by design. Mr. Brennan didn't misjudge her. He chose to humiliate her, weaponizing his position, his power, and the watching eyes of strangers to brand her unworthy. Jessica swallowed hard, the bitter taste of shame turning into something steelier. She stood frozen, burning with the need to scream, to fight, to do anything except shrink smaller under that withering gaze. But the lobby remained a theater where she had been cast as the fool, and Brennan had already delivered the cruelest line. He turned on his heel, muttering something inaudible to Todd as he disappeared into a back office, leaving Jessica alone in the glow of chandeliers that seemed now to mock her too. No one stepped forward to help. No one offered kindness. No one intervened. Jessica's fists clenched at her sides. They all thought she would just take it. They thought wrong. Jessica bit down on her lower lip so hard she tasted blood, the sharp sting anchoring her to the moment. Her vision blurred, but she forced the tears back with a furious blink. Crying now would only feed the smug satisfaction on Brennan's face. No, she would not give him that victory. Not today. Inside her chest, something uncoiled, something primal and scorching. A furnace of rage blazed to life, melting away humiliation, fear, and every ounce of quiet compliance she had carried with her into that lobby. Jessica's fingers trembled as she yanked her phone from her jacket pocket. The screen blurred for a second under the hot sheen of tears she refused to shed, but muscle memory guided her thumb. There was only one number that mattered when the world kicked her down this hard. She didn't need a friend. She didn't need a manager. She needed him. Jessica tapped the number and brought the phone to her ear. It rang once. No more. The deep, familiar voice on the other end didn't even say hello. "Where are you, Jess?" Her breath hitched. She swallowed it down. "Lakeshore Grand," she managed. "They..." "Stay right there," he cut in, the words clipped and heavy with promise. The line went dead. Jessica tucked the phone back into her jacket and stood straighter, drawing a shaky breath into her lungs. Her heart thudded with a new rhythm now, one no longer driven by shame but by the pulsing certainty that a reckoning was coming. 20 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of the Lakeshore Grand slammed open so violently that the brass handles rattled against the frame. The sudden boom echoed across the lobby like a thunderclap, snapping conversations mid-sentence, sending a ripple of unease through the gathered guests. Heads turned. Conversations died. The air itself seemed to stiffen. And through that threshold marched General Frank Dalton, retired U.S. Army, a man who wore 71 years of life like a badge of defiance against time. His frame was broad, posture straight as an iron rod, every step pounding the marble with unshakable purpose. His presence was a fist through the room's cultivated elegance. Guests instinctively shuffled aside, as if an invisible force compelled them to clear his path. The front desk clerks, mid-snicker at some private joke, froze mid-breath, their smiles sliding into confusion, then unease. Frank's piercing blue eyes swept the lobby like radar, locking onto Jessica immediately. There she stood, suitcase still at her side, cheeks flushed with the residue of humiliation, but now standing tall. And then Frank saw him. Mr. Brennan, lounging behind the reception counter, a smirk still curling the edges of his mouth. Frank's jaw clenched once, visibly, the muscle ticking beneath weathered skin. The air in the lobby changed, thickening, tightening, as if the entire building sensed what was coming. The storm Jessica had been waiting for had arrived, and it wore a uniform no amount of polished marble could ever hope to withstand. Frank Dalton stormed toward the reception desk like a warship cutting through a defenseless harbor. His heavy boots thudded against the marble, echoing off the high ceilings, snapping every gaze toward him like a whip crack. Todd, the smirking clerk who had dismissed Jessica with such casual cruelty earlier, visibly flinched backward, his bravado evaporating as the sheer force of Frank's presence hit him. Dalton didn't slow down. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't smile. He slammed his palm down on the polished counter so hard that the surface trembled, scattering a neat stack of brochures like startled birds. Then, in a voice carved from granite and sharpened by decades of battlefield command, he thundered, "Who's the manager here?" The question wasn't really a question. It was a summons, a demand that brooked no denial. Mr. Brennan, still lounging behind the counter with his air of untouchable arrogance, pushed off from where he leaned and sauntered forward. His smirk widened, dismissive and oily. "And you are?" he asked, voice thick with condescension, as if indulging a senile old man who had wandered in off the street. Frank Dalton didn't waste breath answering. He lifted his arm slowly, deliberately, and stabbed a finger straight into Brennan's chest, hard enough that Brennan took a half step back to maintain balance. The room seemed to freeze around them. "You will kneel," Dalton said, every word a hammer blow. "Now, in front of this woman, or I will personally make sure you never work in this town again." For a beat, disbelief hung in the air. Laughter bubbled faintly from a guest in the corner, nervous, unsure. The staff stiffened, waiting to see if the crazy old man was serious. Then Frank reached into his coat, slow and sure, and pulled out a small, battered leather badge holder. He flipped it open. The unmistakable seal of the Veterans Business Alliance gleamed beneath the lights, an organization whose influence stretched deep into the city's corporate veins, tied to licensing boards, real estate trusts, and regulatory committees that could quietly end careers with a single whisper. Dalton didn't need to explain. The badge said it all. Brennan's face drained of color so fast he looked like a sheet of paper. Sweat beaded along his hairline, glistening under the merciless lights. Frank's eyes narrowed. "You have 5 seconds, he growled, voice low and deadly. 1 second. 2. Brennan's knees buckled. The marble floor caught his fall with a soft thud. He lowered himself in front of Jessica, trembling, humiliated, his face a twisted mask of rage and terror. He mumbled something that might have been sorry, but it was barely a whisper, barely human. Frank's voice, like a blade, cut through the fragile silence. "Not to me." He jerked his chin toward Jessica. "Apologize to her. Like you mean it. Then hand over your resignation. Right here. Right now. Jessica stood frozen, fists clenched at her sides, her chest tight. But it wasn't shame that filled her now. It was something hot, something clean, like the first deep breath after drowning. Brennan looked up at her, eyes glassy with unshed tears. His voice cracked in the middle of the words, raw and broken, as he gave a proper apology, not out of kindness, not out of regret, but out of survival. The entire lobby watched, silent and still. Jessica said nothing. She didn't need to. The sight of Brennan kneeling at her feet, trembling, undone, was justice enough. And for the first time that night, Jessica allowed herself to breathe, full, steady, and unafraid. The city lights spilled across the dark velvet of the night, 1,000 tiny fires flickering against the endless black sky. Jessica sat curled in an armchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the presidential suite, a porcelain teacup warm between her hands. The room around her, sprawling, immaculate, quiet, seemed almost unreal. Velvet drapes whispered against the walls, and the soft hum of the distant traffic below filled the silence like a lullaby. She hadn't touched the sprawling fruit platter left for her on the marble coffee table. She hadn't explored the suite's private library or sunk into the deep, endless bathtub. She didn't need any of it. Tonight's victory wasn't in the silk sheets or the complimentary champagne chilling by the bed. It wasn't even in the fact that the suite, once reserved for visiting dignitaries and CEOs, was now hers without charge. It was in the simple, immovable fact that justice had been delivered. Mr. Brennan was gone. Not escorted out with polite warnings, not given a quiet severance package. Gone. Fired unceremoniously by the hotel's owners, who scrambled to contain the damage before it spread like wildfire through the city's influential circles. His name would be whispered with contempt in the industry by morning. His career, once gilded with connections and unchecked authority, crushed beneath the weight of his own arrogance. As for Todd and the other clerks, gone too. Dismissed without ceremony, replaced by a team of professionals flown in urgently from another branch. Their smiles were tight, rehearsed, eager to erase the memory of what had happened in the lobby just hours before. Jessica exhaled slowly, the tea warming her throat as she leaned her head against the cool glass of the window. She let the memory roll over her. The stunned silence in the lobby, the sharp intake of collective breath when Brennan sank to his knees, the wide, unblinking eyes of the wealthy patrons who realized, maybe for the first time, that real power didn't always wear a suit or carry a platinum credit card. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. There was no satisfaction in vengeance for its own sake. Only in the knowledge that dignity had been restored, not just for herself, but for every invisible person who had ever been made to feel small. Jessica smiled softly, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. Somewhere, beyond the veil of glass and stars, she knew her father was watching. A soldier who had taught her that respect wasn't given to the loudest voice or the heaviest wallet, but to the one who stood tall when others tried to push them down. And Frank Dalton, her godfather, her shield, had kept his promise without fanfare, without expectation. Because justice, real justice, wasn't meant to be loud. It was meant to be inevitable. Sometimes it came not with roaring speeches or grand declarations, but in the steady, deliberate footsteps of a man who remembered where loyalty began and never let it die.